You clicked on a video about China, and here you are looking at a quote from Donald Trump about Pakistan. What does one have to do with the other? Way back in 2018, feels like a long time ago now, Donald Trump said, quote, "The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. They give safe haven to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help. No more." Well, Donald Trump is not the most reliable source of information for anything, including U.S. military budgetary figures. So let's just take a look at this report from the Congressional Research Service. What I've highlighted in blue there is the statement that grants from the United States to Pakistan for military hardware actually eclipsed the amount of money that Pakistan was spending buying American hardware. And this particular report covers the years 2001 through 2015. Yeah, there are a lot of numbers here in the millions and a lot of numbers here in the billions, if you take the time to read it. Missiles, helicopters, transport aircraft, on and on it goes. And as you can see, some of these things were paid for by the Pakistani taxpayer, but a whole lot was paid for by the American taxpayer. Which is to say, arms deals with Pakistan were to some extent done on a for-profit basis by the United States, but to some extent were done on a charitable basis. Now, how would you feel about that if you were the Prime Minister of India and you were still to this day at war with Pakistan, even if it is something of a slow-burning, smoldering war? Oh, and now, isn't this a contrast? In 2019, there was no sale of U.S. military weapons to Pakistan. In fact, the U.S. refunded $10.8 million to Pakistan, taken for the purchase of weapons. So they didn't sell them anything at all in 2019. And I guess some purchases were paid for in advance that had to be canceled with a substantial refund handed over. Between 1950 and 2020, Pakistan purchased weapons worth $10 billion from the U.S. under FMS. India's weapons procurement from the United States jumped from a meager $6.2 million to a whopping $3.4 billion in the final year of the Donald Trump administration, according to official data. None of these political events happens in a vacuum. Each domino causes other dominoes to fall. If the United States is now in a military alliance with India, that excludes Pakistan. They cannot be arming both India and Pakistan. If Pakistan is now cut off from its former allies in the United States and in Afghanistan, the government of Afghanistan only exists in as much as it continues to be supplied by, supported by, and financed by the American taxpayer. Well, then the geopolitics of Pakistan change very fundamentally. Pakistan will have to get closer to China than ever before, as it regards itself as locked in a 70-year-long death match with its gigantic neighbor, India. Oh, isn't this an interesting coincidence? At right around the same time, Pakistan has suddenly gotten very interested in a Central Asian connection to China. Yeah, this is an alternative gateway that would circumnavigate Afghanistan. You see how that works? Within 24 hours of the announcement of the quadrilateral strategy, this grand strategy of Joe Biden's that will change the fate of Asia and to a large extent change the fate of the whole world, I would say that most people's reaction was more of perplexity than shock, astonishment, horror. It was perplexing. And it was perplexing in part because Joe Biden's new direction is so different from what was expected of him by both the left and the right. The American left wing completely assumed that Joe Biden would return to the pro-China policies of Bill Clinton. And the right wing basically shared that assumption, but went much, much further, theorizing that Joe Biden was actually a pro-China puppet, that somehow the Chinese government wanted to prevent Donald Trump from being reelected because they were so certain that Joe Biden would be softer, kinder, better, more encouraging towards Chinese economic and political interests. Well, how wrong they were.
The Capitol building, slurs against the Asians, refusal of masks and vaccines, all happen under the facade of democracy.
China will continue to support European integration and support a united and strong EU playing a bigger role in international affairs. In our view, China and Europe are two important players in this multipolar world. The relationship is equal, it is open, it is not targeting any third party or controlled by anyone else. So there's no such a thing that China wants to divide the United States and Europe. While China welcomes greater strategic autonomy of the EU, greater commitment to multilateralism, and coordination among major countries.
Some things in politics are simply bizarre in and of themselves, and some things seem much more bizarre than they are just because they're contrary to what our prior expectations were. China has certainly been adding to the world's state of perplexity in these few days, in part because their propaganda has given us such a strange mix of messages, beginning with this bizarre conspiracy theory that Joe Biden's agenda has nothing to do with democracy, that really this is all about the control of the rare earth metals market. That is a conspiracy theory worthy of QAnon that was put on the front pages of China's government-controlled newspapers, both in Chinese and English, within a few hours of the story breaking. But with a sober second thought, what we find today coming from Chinese propaganda is instead a more nuanced message about the nature of democracy and China's place in the world as they struggle to distance themselves from Joe Biden's rhetoric, which portrays them as the leaders of an anti-democratic axis of evil, for lack of a better term. Hilariously, or tragicomically, the current Chinese government propaganda line is that there's nothing wrong with the United States having this quadrilateral military alliance as long as it's not anti-Chinese. Even though from Joe Biden's own announcement and the statements made on Joe Biden's behalf at the White House by his representative, it has been completely explicit that the purpose of the Quadrilateral Alliance is anti-Chinese. But the official diplomatic and propaganda Chinese position is, hey, if India, Australia, the United States, and Japan, if they all want to work together for their betterment, that's great, because that doesn't need to be directed against any third party. And then they make a parallel propaganda claim that China can have its special relationship with Europe, a set of at least 2 treaties that are in the final stages of being signed right now, that China can have this special alliance with Europe, if you like, without that being in any way negatively directed at a third party. They explicitly said there, they've said several times in the last week or two, this does not have to divide the EU against the United States. China and Europe can just work together for their mutual benefit also. It's a perplexing situation made even more perplexing by the propaganda from the Chinese side. Let me tell you something. If you look at a map in between India and China, Pakistan and Central Asia, they really matter. And as I mentioned in my earlier video, sadly, we have a whole generation of political leaders, we have a whole generation of political followers, we have a whole generation of political journalists who know absolutely nothing about Central Asia. However ignorant Americans are of China, you might as well go ahead and double it when it comes to Central Asia. How ignorant are we of India, our new #1 ally? In the next few weeks, we'll see. Stay tuned, guys. Within just a few days, face-to-face meeting between Chinese and American leaders in Anchorage, Alaska, of all godforsaken places. Maybe we can practice doing funny shows.